All right, I'm just waiting for the number in the bottom of the screen to stop going up. Probably be in just a moment as the number is slowed down a little, and we'll get going. All right, I think we should get started so that because we have a great conversation today, and we want to use the time as effectively and efficiently as possible. Happy Friday, everyone. Happy May Day, for that matter, and welcome back. We're here for the second week of BARI's 2020 conference, the Smart Equitable Commonwealth, Co-Creating the Society We Want. My name is Dan O'Brien. I'm the director of BARI, or the Boston Area Research Initiative. We have a great panel today. Before we get to that, though, I have a couple quick announcements, and then we'll dive right in. And you may have actually seen this in your inbox in just the last half hour. So first, the podcast of our opening keynote panel from last week, The Other Impacts of Corona, came out today. So we managed to get it out in time for this second panel. So it is up, it is available through Apple Podcasts, through Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, or SoundCloud. So if you missed last week's panel, you can go back and listen to it. Or if you just loved it so much you want to listen to it again, you can go back and get it. And all future podcasts will be distributed in the same way. So be sure to subscribe. Second, we have also announced the second slate of panels. So we were announcing them in 4 panel groupings. So we've got the second set all ready to go. These will include on May 29th, Strengthening the Commonwealth Through Cross-Municipal Collaboration, which will be moderated by Ben Levine from the MetroLab Network. Making Housing in Greater Boston Work for Everyone on June 5th, moderated by Luke Schuster from the Boston Indicators Project at the Boston Foundation. Supporting Our Youth, or Supporting Greater Boston's Youth, with Tom Crohan of John Hancock on June 12th. And kicking us off, our second keynote is going to be on May 22nd. It's going to be at a different time. Now, all this is in a couple different places online, so you can find this. It'll be at 11 o'clock in the morning. It is going to be Boston Innovation, Past, Present, and Future, a conversation with Paul Grogan and friends. Our friend Paul Grogan, CEO of the Boston Foundation, will be interviewed by Tiziana Deering of Radio Boston about the past, present, and future of innovation in Boston. And it becomes even more trenchant of a conversation. We planned this before the shutdown, and future has a much different connotation. So it'd be great to get his perspective on where we've been and where we're going, given his over 30, 40 years of work in civic life in Boston. And we'll have respondents. There'll be 3. There'll be Councilor Michelle Wu of the City of Boston, Tanisha Sullivan, the president of the Boston chapter of the NAACP, and Catherine Lusk, the co-director of BU's Initiative on Cities. So that's a really exciting panel. It's going to be May 22nd at 11 to 12. So announcements out of the way. I want to talk about today's panel very briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to the person who's in charge today. Today we're here for Co-Creating, Designing Together for Better Outcomes. And it's going to be moderated by Eric Gordon. He's professor of civic media and director of the Engagement Lab at Emerson College. He's also the co-founder of Boston Civic Media, one of BARI's sister consortia here locally. Eric and I have worked together for years. Eric has been a close friend of BARI since the beginning. He's involved in every one of these conferences. And if I were to pick anyone to lead a conversation about co-creation, it would be him. This is one of the main themes of the conference this year, as you all know at this point. So this is going to be a fantastic conversation, and Eric is going to lead us through. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric to introduce the panel and the panelists. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dan. It's great to be here. I'm really excited to host this conversation. And I just wanted to start by saying a few things about co-creation. This panel is about co-creation, right? This is, and again, it's a theme of the conference, but we wanted to get this conversation started specifically with this panel. There are many definitions of the term, and there are many terms that point to this definition. We could have called this panel participatory design. We could have called it co-design, civic design, design justice. But because we were focused primarily on policy, we landed on co-creation. So I want to start with the definition from the Collective Wisdom Report published last year by the Open Doc Lab at MIT. Co-creation is when projects emerge out of process and evolve from within communities and with people rather than being made for or about them. Or the concept of co-creation reframes the ethics of who creates, how, and why. Co-creation interprets the world and seeks to change it through a lens of equity and justice. So how is this done? How are people seeking to restructure who's involved in decision-making and ultimately how policy gets made? The answer is complex and involves a wide variety of tactics and approaches from building better interfaces for people to interact with data, to building better processes for people to create new interfaces. Ultimately, what we're seeing in large and small organizations is a questioning of the power inherent in any form of governance, and a creativity in inventing processes that challenge the status quo. Ultimately, for policies and programs to benefit everyone, then everyone needs not only to be invited, but welcomed into the process. So the work was complicated in the before times, when physical proximity was an option. Doing this work in the context of a pandemic, when all relationship building and social connectivity is remote, is now far more complex. Hopefully, we won't be 100% remote forever, but even when we ease back into physicality, our presumptions of people's comfort working closely in groups will be challenged. So each of our panelists will spend about 7 or 8 minutes presenting on their work. When they're done, I want to encourage a conversation, not just about what they've done, but what they will do in this uncertain future. So let's do this. I'm going to introduce the panel, and I want to just give you a couple of ground rules. Well, not ground rules. We have now one mechanism for questions, so we've disabled the chat. We have the Q&A function that's available. Please put your questions in there at any time during this conversation, and then they will get back to me and I will facilitate those questions with our panelists. So I'm going to introduce our panelists one at a time, and then they'll speak and they'll introduce the next one. So I'm pleased to introduce Tia Thompson, who's going to start with a presentation called Youth and City Hall, Using Human-Centered Design to Support Civic Action in Boston Public Schools. Tia is a recent grad from Northeastern with a bachelor's degree in interaction design. Her research focuses on designing for equity and inclusion and what it really means to be human-centered. She was the director of Scout Labs, Northeastern's civic research and design team. So with that, welcome, Tia.
Sorry, unmuting myself. Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen now. Get us up to. Is that all working? Cool. So today I'm going to be talking briefly about co-creation, obviously, but specifically how we implemented co-creation principles in this project that we worked on with the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. So I'll start by kind of adding on to what Eric was just talking about in terms of defining my view of co-creation. I think that it's pretty clear everyone has kind of a nuanced understanding of co-creation. You'll probably see that in the rest of this panel as well. And you kind of mentioned all of these words already, but co-creation, co-design, participatory design, like all of these terms, which are really already in the mainstream and are touching on the same thing, which is about engaging other people to gain deeper insights with hopefully a goal of creating a better solution in the end. I pull from design justice principles quite frequently. I believe that the role of a designer should be as a facilitator rather than an expert. And we should see the people who are using our design solutions as the true experts that we're trying to learn from. And I think that this mindset is really conducive for creating joint value, which is a goal of co-creation. One important point that I think sometimes gets lost in discussions of human-centered design is that it's really not just about doing user research at the beginning or this empathize phase. although that is definitely critical. It's also not just about doing usability testing at the end, although that is also critical too. It's about getting stakeholder participation throughout the design process really as much as possible. So in all of these stages. So how does the co-design process look in practice? You need to know your problem statement or your objective, and you should definitely also understand the broader ecosystem of the problem and who those stakeholders are, how are they connected to one another. But then once you kind of understand who your stakeholders are, then it's important to bring them into your process, interview them to try and understand their pain points and their experiences, hold workshops to start brainstorming, think of big ideas and bold solutions. And I always say to think too big first and then narrow it down. And you can bring people in to help you narrow that down too through voting or feedback sessions. They can really help you to prioritize what's important. And then when it comes to actually designing and building out your prototype, then eventually your final product or service, then you want to get in front of people constantly, keep asking for feedback, keep testing, keep iterating until you're ready to launch it for the first time, and then get ready to keep iterating from there. So I want to talk about how we used co-creation in our project with Boston Public School students. As Eric mentioned, my team at Scout Labs partnered with the Mayor's Office of Nearman Mechanics to conduct research and design a tool to help middle and high school students meaningfully engage with local government. There were multiple layers of co-creation here. Monum was co-creating with our team, and our team was co-creating with middle and high school students throughout Boston. And as college students, we were one step closer to that target audience. So the students were more quick to trust us and open up to us, and they didn't really see us as intimidating adults or domineering authority figures in any way. And I bring this up because I think that trust is a huge factor in successful co-creation. The facilitators of any workshops or brainstorming sessions really have to be able to build trust with the people that they're working with. And this will mean different things in different projects and different contexts, but you just have to be cognizant of how you might be perceived when entering a space or a community that is not your own, and trying to solve something for them. For this particular design challenge, we engaged as many different stakeholders as we could. So that included teachers and students and education policymakers. But much of our qualitative research came from interviews. And one particular co-creation method that was hugely beneficial on top of interviews was these student workshops that we ran in Boston Public School classrooms. In these workshops, we ran a series of activities to help us better understand the students' feelings towards government, passions towards different issues in their communities, and also in what capacity these students would feel most comfortable reaching out to local government. In one 45-minute session, just to give you kind of an idea of what we did, we ran a brainstorming exercise, we completed a set of worksheets, we ran an agree or disagree activity, which for that one, we just used these posters hung up across the classroom with different statements written on them and a simple scale of agree on one side, disagree on the other. We gave everybody a sticker and had them place that sticker where they felt, just to indicate how they felt about that statement. And the goal of these activities were always to generate conversation. So for us, this means more qualitative data. So that's really important. And to help with this, we always worked in small groups. So you can see here, it's 4 or 5 students max per facilitator. And we tried to keep things really active and fast and tried to make some activities feel more like a game, just to make sure the students were engaged. And this is just a good practice in general, and not just when you're working with young students or teenagers. And kind of in terms of findings, we found that students have issues that they're passionate about but don't know how to act on them. We also found disparities in data that were really interesting in comparing differently resourced schools. For example, almost double the amount of students at an exam school felt that they could create change in their community as compared to a public school in Jamaica Plain. So we took all of this research and developed a website to help students connect with people in City Hall. And with this site, of course, we held many testing and feedback sessions with Boston youth, which led us to make changes, both big and small, on the site from the functionality to the tone and the messaging. So co-creation principles, this idea of designing with people and not for them, are essential to our world becoming more humane, more inclusive, definitely more empathetic as well. I think creating alongside the people who will use your design solutions in the end helps to validate assumptions and lower the risk that no one will connect with what you end up putting out there. So for this project, co-creation was a critical way to capture the language and the tone that resonates most with our users. Much of our learning in designing for teens came from understanding how they spoke and how they wanted to be spoken to. And with this input, we were really able to create a website that was tailored to young people without being condescending or, on the opposite end, looking like we were trying too hard to be cool. One last thing before I finish, I'll actually just go back. I want to also point out that there is immense psychological value in bringing people in to help build out your solutions. And for students who felt intimidated by City Hall or like City Hall didn't care about what they had to say, it was really, really important that our team was going in as basically an extension of City Hall and telling them that we wanted to hear them. We wanted to know what their honest thoughts were. So co-creation processes really lead to a feeling of ownership that is very special. And you get to build up a network of people who are invested in the success of your project. And with that, I will pass it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Tia. That was great. Our next paper is called Empowering Community-Based Organizations to Utilize Data for Program Monitoring and Evaluation. And this is Sarah Krischels-Goen. She's a senior research associate at the Cutler Institute of Health and Social Policy at the University of Southern Maine. She directs a data innovation project, an initiative focused on building the evaluation and data capacity of Maine's mission-driven institutions. She has over a decade of experience in conducting evaluation. And I can no longer read the rest of her bio because she started sharing her screen, but that's okay. She's fantastic and you're gonna love her talk.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that that was gonna have that result. I was trying to be proactive and save a little bit of time. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Eric, for the lovely introduction, and thanks so much to Dan and BARI for inviting me to speak today. I direct the Data Innovation Project at the University of Southern Maine's Cutler's Institute for Health and Social Policy, and today I'm going to describe a strategy that we've been using in Maine since 2016 to empower community-based organizations to utilize data more effectively, and talk about how our approach relies on co-creation to have a significant impact in a relatively short period of time. But first of all, who the heck are we? Everybody always who hears our name, they always want to know a little bit more about who we are and what we do. So we know that many community-based organizations have limited capacity to demonstrate their impact through data and evaluation, even though they are always being asked to do so. And only some have access to expertise and resources around data and evaluation, and often those resources are quite expensive. So the DIP was founded in 2016 to build the data-informed capacity of Maine's mission-driven organizations. And we do this by providing free and affordable knowledge and expertise, convening strategic data conversations, providing coaching, training, and technical assistance, translating and disseminating data and research, and also through a community research assistantship program where we embed a second-year master's student in a community organization for a full year to work on a data project, and we oversee that work. But at our core, we really are engaged in co-creation. Across all of this different work, we engage with organizations and individuals in equal partnership, which for our team really means honoring the knowledge and expertise that those in the field bring to the table and acknowledging that many people have very negative associations with data and have had negative interactions with data. And we engage in reflection and open communication with the organizations we work with so that they can tell us honestly if something is or is not appropriate. And this really enables us to build the internal capacity of those organizations in a shared way and ensures that we're ending up with a product that's realistic and feasible for that organization. As Tia said, it's really built on gaining trust and going from there. So I want to talk, we do a lot of different things. So I want to talk about just one of the most successful strategies that we have implemented in our work, and that's what we call the free data clinic. Our data clinics are an opportunity for an organization to receive 2 hours of free one-on-one technical assistance with 2 members of our team. And it's around a data issue of their choosing. And since the summer of 2016, we've worked with over 80 different organizations in Southern Maine in this way. And so far, most of the organizations who have participated have been related to education, youth development, health, or the environment, although it's been a wide range. So I'll talk about a little bit of the process and what happens. This all starts with organizations actually applying through a short online form, and we market the clinics periodically through different partners and channels, nonprofit associations, professional associations. And then we review the applications and schedule them based on availability, interest, and the goals of their data clinic that they tell us about. Most of our applicants are interested in talking through a data collection effort, like developing or improving a survey, or some sort of data storytelling, like an infographic. And other popular topics are how to analyze the data that they have collected, or how to make sense of their data, and developing performance metrics or targets. About a week before the data clinic, we reach out to confirm, first of all, it's always very important, and to obtain any materials that might be helpful for us to review ahead of time. So often this might be a strategic plan or a draft survey or a logic model if they have one for their program. If there are no materials, we still review their website to get a sense of who they are and what they do. And we meet internally to talk through our initial thoughts and feedback and map out a very loose agenda. And then we're off, we get into it. We sit with an organization, and it's typically 2 or 3 people. Again, as Tia said, when it starts to be larger groups, it gets really hard to engage in this co-creative process. And we do this in person. We go through introductions, review the agenda, and ensure it matches with their goals and expectations. And then we just start asking a lot of questions about their program, and more specific questions about the issue that they have brought to us. And so, for example, if they want help with redesigning a survey, we start by asking them to articulate the purpose of the survey. Why are they even collecting this information? Why didn't it meet their expectations? We'll often start mapping out what they say onto a whiteboard and reflect back what we've heard. And we then start building in some suggestions, and we always check, does that sound right or not? And many times we're helping them pinpoint what they really do need to be collecting and refer to their vision and mission and programmatic theories of change. And that often results in data reductions in what they're hoping to collect, as opposed to adding to. In all of these instances, we're really working together until we are all in agreement. And we have a handy little binder that we've created of frequently used resources that we bring to, so we can pull those out as we need them if we want to provide some examples or some group learning. And it can get pretty intense. So after about an hour and 15 minutes, we have what we call the pause, where we check in and we gauge how far we've gotten towards the goals. We let the participants choose whether to continue our discussion or if they want to switch gears. And then at about 15 minutes before the end, we try to move into some action planning, where we ask, what are the highest priorities we've talked about today? Who and what do they have available to get that done? And when do they think it's feasible to accomplish those goals? So afterwards, about a week afterwards, or within the week, we send out notes and resources and any other web links or handouts or things that we think might be useful for that organization, as well as those action steps. And then that's it. That's the end of our interaction. But of course, we are collecting data. So we do let them know that we will send out a survey in 3 months. And this is what we find. Our survey is showing that many people are reporting back that they have increased their confidence around data in general. that their organization is implementing the changes as a result of their data clinic, and that these are often related to data collection, like reworking or redesigning a survey, reviewing their data in a new way. Some have reported creating simple data dashboards or simply reformatting graphics and reports to tell a better organizational story. Occasionally, people reach out to us to ask if we can review something that they've developed after our data clinic, an infographic or a survey, and we always certainly give them a little bit of our time and some review and feedback. So that's just one of the many things that we do, but I hope I've shared with you something that inspires you to think about how co-creation promotes some sustainable results, even when you have an incredibly short amount of time to actually co-create together, and that perhaps those principles are even more critical in these types of short duration transactions. What I personally love about this process is that it allows us to brainstorm with organizations and help them to develop quality products, but the end result belongs entirely to them, and it's created through their own agency and through their own capacity. Alas, I only have 8 minutes. I wish I could talk quite a bit more, but feel free to reach out or to visit our website, datainnovationproject.org, to learn more about what we offer. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Our next talk this afternoon is from Violet Lingenfelter, and she's going to give a talk called Bus Amenities Allocation Decision Assistance Tool. So Violet's an environmental science major at Northeastern. She is also an intern, a GIS and data visualization intern at the MBTA Office of Performance Management and Innovation. Welcome, Violet.
Hi, thank you so much. Let me share my screen with everyone. All right, so let's see. All right, does this look good? So thank you for your introduction, Eric. I will be presenting on the Bus Amenities Allocation Decision Assistance Tool. And what I will be doing is essentially telling you all a story about how we at the MBTA were able to implement co-creation to create an internal tool to help us decide where we should allocate bus amenities. And so this work was done by myself. I'm Violet. I'm an intern at the Office of Performance Management and Innovation with Anna Gartzman, who is the Director of Research Strategy at the Office of Performance Management and Innovation, Elizabeth Winters Ronaldson, who is the Deputy Director of Advertising and Asset Development for the MBTA, and Anna Sangri, a former intern at OPMI as well. So first of all, you are probably all wondering, what the heck are bus amenities? So a bus amenity is essentially anything that makes the experience at a bus stop better. So that can be a shelter, that can be a bench, or that can be something like real-time arrival information about when the next bus is coming. But at their core, bus amenities are the things that make the wait for the bus better. So the main research question we were tasked with answering was, how should we distribute bus stop amenities? And we were able to, at the agency, come to a pretty clear consensus on what criteria matters for how you distribute bus amenities. We wanted to include information about neighborhood demographics, ridership at the bus stop, so how many people get on the bus at that bus stop, and how long people are typically waiting at bus stops. And we wanted to factor all of these things into a decision about where and how we should be distributing bus stop amenities, but we were unable to come to any consensus on how to weight these criteria. Additionally, we were trying to consider which stops we even wanted to look at. So at the MBTA, there are different types of stops that are outside. There are bus stops, there's bus rapid transit stops, and there are some light rail stops that are above ground where people have to wait outside in the weather for their service. And so we were trying to figure out if all of these stops should be considered in this research project about where we should be allocating bus stop resources and which stops we should allocate resources to first. So enter slide. Slide is how we approached solving this problem. So we originally wanted to make a data-driven decision about where we should allocate resources. We wanted a ranked list of which stops deserved resources first. And we decided that that was almost impossible if we couldn't decide on how we needed to weight things. So instead, we pivoted and we worked on creating a data-driven discussion tool, which is what you see here. So Slide is our street-level infrastructure distribution engine. It consists of two panels. There is one panel where the user can control what bus stops we look at and how we weight the different criteria we consider when we consider where to allocate bus amenities. And on the other panel, we can see how our decisions actually affect where resources are allocated in a map-based form. So the first step that the user has is to decide which stops we should be analyzing. And this allows policymakers and advocates and people who are working with the MBTA to change which stops we're looking at very dynamically, which can be important because often we want to compare what things would look like if we left something out. And this has pretty extensive filtering, which was a constraint on how we wanted to allocate resources. So the second step of using this tool is to figure out how we wanted to weight our criteria. So we gave each of the three categories of criteria for where to allocate bus resources a slider, and the user can dynamically change how much weight each one of these criteria is getting, and then see the results. So you can slide these sliders around and then quickly visualize where we would be allocating resources. This is very important because it allows policymakers and other people who are giving their input into where bus amenities should be allocated an opportunity to play with the data and really get to know the data, understand the implications of the decisions that they're making. Because a decision that might seem very minor in terms of like, well, let's weight, or let's weight ridership a little bit less, can drastically impact where in the greater Boston area we allocate our resources. So the next step is to play with the data. So this tool allows users to look at different towns in the greater Boston area and see how amenities would be distributed in the different towns. Most importantly, it allows users to download the data and bring it into their own data analysis tool, whether that's Excel or Tableau or something like that, and get to know the data even further and really explore what they've gotten. And so our basic outcomes were that we created a tool that, instead of focusing on creating a single data-driven decision, allowed us to have data-driven discussions that shaped our policy and really allowed us to co-create the decision we are making. This tool has aided in communications with people who have all degrees of data literacy, with policymakers, with researchers, with community advocates, members from impacted communities. And it's been a key tool in allowing us to communicate and be very transparent with how we were making our decisions. And so some of the key takeaways that we had from this process was that making a user experienced co-creation tool for decision-making provides so much value to stakeholders that just a data-driven decision does not. It gives the users and the policymakers, the advocates, more agency in the decision that's being made, a greater understanding of how the data that they're using impacts things on the ground level. And it allows our data to be more transparent. It allows people to really dig into what's going on and play with it, understand, and feel good about the decisions that they're making. So thank you.
Thank you, Violet. That was fascinating. And there's questions for each of the panelists. We're going to wait. We have one more presentation from Emily Hostetler. And then when she is done, we'll open it up for questions for each of you. So Emily is going to present on a topic called For the Community by the Community, Fostering Local Partnerships to Create Meaningful Forum Discussions. And just quickly about Emily, she's a Forum Education Associate at the Museum of Science in Boston. She creates and oversees a variety of forum projects throughout the year. She premiered the pilot forums on climate intervention research in Boston and Phoenix in summer 2018 and was a member of the team that built the nationally implemented NOAA-funded forums on extreme weather hazards. And I'll leave it at that, and please join me in welcoming Emily.
Hi, everyone. I am going ahead and going to share my screen. All right, you should see that. Great. So, once again, my name is Emily Hostetler. I'm an education associate at the Museum of Science here in Boston. Me and my colleagues focus mostly on creating what we call forum programs, which we define as facilitated roundtable discussions that bring community members together to talk about topics at the intersection of science and policy. We've been involved in running around 150 of these programs nationally and internationally. And today I'll share how we were able to flip our usual model of working with policymakers or scientists to inform our discussion question to instead starting with the community members and asking what they find important to bring to the table, quite literally. So what does our new model involve? We wanted to test out a new public engagement with science model that focuses on co-creation, a model that has an informal science institution and civic entity working closely together. But how do we do that? Our basic goals were to increase agency among community members, increase public interest in attending museum programs, and increase participation in policymaking and informing research questions, all while creating long-standing local partnerships, gathering information about community priorities, and developing community-based forums. So we proposed a co-creation model based on 3 steps of public participation: agenda setting, decision-making, and policy forming, as outlined in the Rowan Frewer 2005. We then decided on 4 main events that will fit into these categories that our work will be centered around: the welcome event, the topic selection workshop, the forum event, and dissemination to policymakers. And I'll talk a little bit more about those later. Each step of the way, we had a group of partners working together to ensure that community voices were heard, policymakers' needs were met, and the topic discussion would be engaging for the public. So there are 3 main categories of partners working together: the community partner, the civic partner, and an informal science institution partner. In Boston, the informal science institution partner was us at the Museum of Science. The Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics that we already heard about today was our civic partner, and the Urban College of Boston was our community partner. It was important to us and for the model that during each step of the public participation process, the 3 partner institutions worked together to make decisions, all of which were facilitated by us at the Museum of Science. As you can imagine, choosing partners in this process is extremely important. We learned about the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, and obviously you heard about them earlier. They're a great partner for us in this co-creation process. We also partnered with the Urban College of Boston because they have a lot of civic engagement already, and their community members had a lot of involvement together with their community and with the college, and they were just a really strong partner for us as they represented a lot of the people who don't normally come to the Museum of Science, and we wanted to make sure we were open to them and they were felt comfortable coming in. However, as a scientist, we know that we can't just do this process once, we have to replicate it. So this year we had our groups of partners working here in Boston as well as in Portland, Oregon. And now partner groups in Michigan and North Carolina are also going through this process along as well. And while each group is following the same module, each forum topic and event will be unique to their own community's needs. So how do we even get to a forum topic using the community informed process? After we had our partner groups assembled, we used team-based inquiry as developed by the NICE network to work together to think of the right questions to ask and learn from in an educational setting. This process helped us to develop inquiry questions that allowed us to collect data from the public, analyze that data, and use it to improve our next steps. The best part of TBI was that it allowed us as non-evaluation professionals to work together and to collaborate on questions we needed to answer in order to improve our work and focus on what needed to be done for the following steps. I will also mention that while we are internally evaluating ourselves during this process, we also have an external evaluator who is meeting with each partner to evaluate how the overall project is going to inform our final objective of creating a guide to the CCPDS. So let's get into the details of each step and what we learned by going through this co-creation process. Our first hosted event was the welcome event. Before the welcome event, we all worked really hard to actually get to know each other and our work. We spent time meeting each other at each other's offices and attending different events to make sure we were all bonded as partners and we were on the same page. The goal of the welcome event was to meet the community members and collect some informal and formal data about what is important to them and their community to start forming some potential forum topics. The event was held at the Urban College of Boston, and we welcomed students and faculty to come listen to various speakers from the city of Boston and let us know what they were interested in talking about at a forum. We gathered some data and we learned quite a bit about our participants and the event. For example, we learned how to collect data in Mandarin and Spanish, as that is what most of the students at UCB speak as a first language. So because we knew that we would have so many UCB community members in the room, we wanted to be sure that we could learn from them while they were there. We collected data as pictures and text drawn on white paper with markers and as formal surveys. One of the things we were hoping to do was narrow down some ideas for possible topics we could talk about at the next event, which is our topic selection workshop. So we talked together and we came up with a list of different topics we thought might be interesting and relevant to bring to the forum based on what the city was interested in and what our UCB community partners might think would be important to their students. By doing this, we are able to narrow down our ideas into 3 topics that were the highest priority for our community members, were of interest to and actionable to the city, and could become an interesting forum discussion along the line. And those 3 topics were education, housing, and the economy and jobs. So next up is our topic selection workshop. This took place about 2 months after our welcome event. The topic selection workshop took place at the Museum of Science, where we actually welcomed UCB students and faculty and local experts on each of those 3 topics I mentioned to come together for a day-long workshop and decide what they prioritized for a forum topic. All of the participants, including the local experts, sat at the tables together and had facilitated discussions about each of the 3 topics. During the workshop, each local expert presented on their topic, then each table group would come up with some ideas within the topic of things that they would want to talk about at a forum. We learned a lot at the topic selection workshop. We had done similar workshops with only experts before, but this time we were bringing both together to discuss what was important. We learned that participants really liked how diverse the room was, the variety of topics, and how the conversations were facilitated in small groups. And they also liked how the experts were actually co-learners throughout the day, not just experts for the topic. However, we also learned that we could structure the conversations to be more clear in their purpose, and we could be more clear in the purpose of each individual's role in the conversation throughout the day. At the topic selection workshop, we had people tell us what they prioritized through sticky dot voting, individual worksheets and table worksheets. We also ended with a survey that reviewed the event as a whole. The topics were messy and overlapping and all obviously hugely important to the people who live in Boston. However, we noticed that the housing and education topics seemed to be trending as more important. As a team, we reviewed all of the ideas that were brought up, all of the data trends, and what was exciting to us and how the ideas would work towards Boston's civic priorities. Based on all of this information, we actually decided to move forward with the topic of housing innovation. So that leads us to our forum event. We had roughly a year to research our topic of housing innovation, bring in experts as our guides, create, develop, test, and design the forum. So the goal of the forum event was to engage our community partners, civic partners, and typical museum audience in a discussion on what we decided as space use and housing innovation in the greater Boston area. and instill an agency around these topics and participants. Unfortunately, our event was scheduled for the end of March and had to be canceled. However, we know this is an important topic and one that won't be going away for our city, at least for a long time. So we've been making plans to go virtual and we'll be premiering our new site with the content we had already developed just in a new online capacity. We hope that whatever data we are able to capture using this online platform, we can learn from and share with our partners. We do still have high hopes that of our in-person forum happening someday. All of the materials are printed and waiting for us on the other side of all of this. Along with that, we don't quite know what the next steps are for our dissemination to our policymakers, but hopefully we'll be able to share results from this virtual platform and allow our community members and policymakers to get together to discuss what they find. So that is all my time. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you to NSF for funding all of our work and all of our lovely co-authors as well.
Thank you, Emily. It was great to hear about that work at the Museum of Science. We have about 10 minutes. And for these 10 minutes, we have some very specific questions that came from the audience. And I'd like to just ask those very specific questions and ask you to answer them quickly. And then we can get to some broader questions. So for example, for Violet, the question is there an open data set of currently existing amenities?
Yes, there is. It's if anybody wants to Google the MBTA Blue Book, there's the PADI data set. I pasted a link to that data set as a response to that question in the Q&A.
Great, thank you. And another question for you, Violet. There's a question about how the algorithm, how does the algorithm based on different prioritization work? Can you very briefly describe that?
Very, very briefly, it's a weighted ranking algorithm. That's the briefest I can get with it.
You can be slightly less brief than that if you.
Okay, so we created a score for each index that we had for each of the 3 criteria that had sliders, and then weighted each one, and then calculated the rank based on those weights for each bus stop that was selected in the first step, where you selected which stops you wanted to look at.
Great, thank you. And a quick question for Sarah. Sarah, does data innovation connect organizations to researchers when their data questions require more extensive study?
Yeah, well, what we help them to do is first recognize that their question or their data need may need somebody with more expertise. That's often the first piece that we do. Sometimes the work develops into an ongoing relationship that we may engage in with that organization if they have some funding or some grant dollars to engage some evaluation or research. And other times we connect them with other experts within our own institute or outside of the field. But a lot of times it's working with them to explain that what they're after is something that's more complex than they can do on their own.
Thanks. And one more question for you, Sarah. What is the connection or distinction between co-creating data innovation and good evaluation practice?
I don't know if they're completely disconnected. I think that co-creation is part of good evaluation practice. And we embed those principles throughout all of the research and evaluation work that we're doing as part of our data innovation project.
Thanks. You know, and what's interesting about all of these, you're all describing a very particular process. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you know, in some respects, we are needing to rethink a lot of the sort of values that are implicit or explicit in these processes now. And I have a question now that I want to ask, and I'm not going to ask Emily and Tia to answer first, but the question is, why is this co-creation process important now? I mean, both of you spoke very eloquently about the need for this and why it's important in the work that you've done. But right now, in this particular crisis, is it more important just to get things done fast so people remain safe? Or how do we balance that? How do we balance at this particular moment, good process, let's say, and what appear to be very immediate needs of communities.
I can jump in, and I think this, like the short answer, and it's the answer I always give, is it depends, I think, in terms of what the exact problem we're trying to tackle is. You know, if it's like an immediate crisis that like needs to be solved really quickly, then maybe you don't have time to test it with somebody first. But I think in general, understanding what the needs of a community are requires co-creation. You can't really just like from the outside understand, because that community might have something going on that's working locally that you might want to learn from. So things like that, that I think co-creation is very, very important in terms of this crisis right now and any major issues that will happen in the future as well. But I think it's hard to answer the question of what's that balance, because it would probably be on a case-to-case basis. Implement it as much as possible, whatever as much as possible means.
Emily?
Oh, no, I was just going to say Tia did a great job of responding to that. You know, co-creation does take a lot of time. As you saw, many of our projects were tested over and over and over again with many different groups of people. But if you don't hear from the community, you don't know what they need, and you have to understand the community and be in that community in order to talk with them and share their concerns. And there's nothing more important than bringing the policymakers to that community and having them there and having them listen to each other. So while you're right, Tia, you know, there's some things that have to be solved immediately. You can't forget that the community is there and they want to share their expertise.
So I have a question about, most of you talked in some ways about trust and the importance of cultivating that trust. You know, that in any of these relationships, there's some designer, there's some person who's getting paid to do this work, let's say, who's inviting volunteers into the process, and relying on some underlying trust between this relationship between the person getting paid, the professional that is there to do this work and getting paid for it, and then the person who's volunteering their time. So the question, I guess my question is twofold. One, how do we collectively, how should we think about that? Should we be paying people who participate in these kinds of efforts? Is true co-creation compensated? That's one question. And then the related question is this question of trust. You know, that is one way to trust actually compensating people for their time, or are there other ways that you're thinking about trust building right now? And anybody can jump in to answer that question.
It's so interesting to me that you are saying trust and compensation in the same sentence, because we often compensate our participants when we know they're going to be spending a long time with us, because we know that they might be sacrificing some other sort of income to be with us. I've never considered that trust building necessarily, except that we more of an understanding that we value their time and know that they could be doing something else to support their family or something. And so we're willing to pay them to be there, so that way they know that we value them. Is that trust building? I'm not sure.
Yes, I agree with what you said, Emily. I think that one of the ways of building trust is to demonstrate that you listen. And so you actively listen and you reflect back what you are hearing, and that in products or things that you produce as a result, that reflects the actual words to the extent possible of the people, to really demonstrate that you have listened to what they had to say. They see their work and their feedback in what you are then producing from that day. I think that's one of the big ways of building trust. I think another way of building trust is to acknowledge the expertise that you have and the expertise that they have, and to name it, and to name any sort of perceived power balance that might be in the room, and to acknowledge it and to work through it transparently. I think those steps really do help build the trust when you are working with the community or working with even with clients that are new.
Yeah, and definitely with the project that I was just talking about, when we were working with students, we did run into issues where students felt that the government wasn't treating them well or treating people of their identity well, or whatever it might be, where they had a distrust inherently in government. And there we were trying to figure out how we could get them to engage with government. And so I think that power dynamic thing was definitely important in terms of we having to go in there and acknowledging that, and then also making sure that they felt safe. So telling them where their information is going and what it's going to be used for pretty specifically at the beginning, so that they were able to open up and speak honestly. And also telling them that, like, their teachers aren't even going to know what they said, and we're not going to spread your name anywhere. Like, this isn't going to be tied to you in any way. I think that helped. Obviously, in this instance, because they were students, we didn't compensate them. I think that they felt compensated in terms of they got like a free day in class to work with us instead of with the teacher.
Great, thanks for that. And so we only have 2 minutes left, and I actually want to do a kind of lightning round question for each of you that came from someone who's listening here, who asked this: what does the follow-up process look like to make sure relationships continue to be fostered? So just to very precisely, how do you make sure that these things persist when the project is over? And I'm wondering if you can all just give me just 30 seconds of thought on that, and then we're going to wrap up our panel. Emily, we'll start with you.
All right. So we have been working really hard to continue to invite UCB students to other museum programs. We've seen some of our UCB students who are learning to become teachers and things come to our teacher programs. They come to our other forum events. We invite them to come to all of our other programming, so that way they continue to feel welcomed into the space.
Great. Sarah?
Sure. It depends a lot on the interaction that we've had, but we try to follow up with organizations that we've worked with to see how things are going. We try to, if the work or the project has resulted in a product, we try to make sure that that goes out to all of the stakeholders and the community members that were part of that, so that it doesn't just go on a shelf or up somewhere. And we try to do that through some different ways of dissemination, as opposed to just a traditional, say, report or something like that. We try to make it something that's more interactive and engaging, and so that folks really feel that they're getting something back for what they've contributed.
Thank you. Violet?
So for our project, that means updating our data as new things come in, and particularly given the current crisis situation, we are going back and reevaluating what we are considering criteria, and we're considering now what are lifeline bus networks that are essential. I think also it's really important to not let the co-creation process stop once we've reached a product, and to continue with evaluating together, and as we continue to create and go back and iterate on our projects, to keep the co-creative process alive.
Great. And Tia?
Yeah, definitely not too much to add on here. I think the iteration thing is definitely accurate. Like, after something launches, that's not the last time you should be co-creating. But I think on top of that too, just it's really important for people who are involved in that co-creation process, and I mentioned it in my talk in terms of like ownership, to let them see what a final product might look like, and whether that's just sending out an email with a link to it or whatever it might be, and checking in and making sure that they're giving constant feedback. I have found that people love to keep giving feedback on something that they were involved in the early stages, because they feel like they can see where like their input made it what it is today.
Thanks, Tia, and thanks to everyone. This has been an extraordinary conversation. Your presentations were fantastic and provided all sorts of food for thought. So if you listen very closely, you can hear the rumbling of applause. So take that in on this Friday afternoon. And now I'm going to hand it over to Dan.
Oh, thank you, Eric, and thank you to all the panelists, Tia, Violet, Sarah, Emily, thank you so much for these presentations, for these talks. And thank you, Eric, for guiding us through. This is a great conversation. I feel like it's the perfect kickoff to the conference in the sense of, well, it is the theme. And also, it's funny, I think we talked about co-creation, and we will talk about co-creation in a lot of the topical panels, but I think it was Tia who made a really good point that how co-creation manifests depends on the question, right? It depends on the project. And so seeing 4 different examples in 4 different areas next to each other, I thought was fantastic, because it gets your head going, that goes beyond sort of guidelines like listen and respond and hear what people want, and gets to what can it really look like on the ground. And so I thought that was fantastic. I hope others enjoyed that just as much as I did. So moving on. So next week, please join us again. Same bat time, same bat channel, or same BARI time, same BARI channel, 3:30 next Friday. It will be our next panel, number 3 in the run. And again, please see the podcast site if you want to go back and visit previous presentations. That would be fantastic. And also our next slate of panels, which was just announced. And as I stumble over myself, I want to make sure everyone knows next week is Collaboratively Building Climate Resilience. So next week is our climate panel for this year's conference. But right now, more importantly, we have the BARI Happy Hour. So please come join us. bit.ly BARI Happy Hour. I'm not sure if Will had a chance to put it in the Q&A before he left, so I will put it there just in case. I don't know if I'm allowed to ask a question because I'm the host. Oh, there it is. Okay, so it's already been posted. So please come join us there. We're going to take a 5-minute break and zip over. It's a separate Zoom room. But again, thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Eric, for leading us forward. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And we'll see you next Friday, if not in 5 minutes.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. It was great.